China Watch Radio is brought to you in part by Sushi Market Sprouts on 7th in Santa Cruz and Kaito in the Capitol Mall Food Court. Treat yourself to the finest Japanese cuisine you'll find anywhere with fresh sushi to go and delicious ramen dinners. Sushi Market Sprouts and Kaito. Yum! Happy Thursday, everybody. This is China Watch Radio for today, the 2nd of June. Hard to believe it's that late in the year already. I'm Bill Graff along with Jonty Collier. We are holding down the fort today. Michael Olson could not be with us, and Amy Fouquet is also not with us today. So we invite you to, join us. We're going to talk about news-related items today. Bunch of stuff in the news about China. And first of all, I want to tell everybody that if you'd like to follow along with what we're talking about and you want to know some in-depth, more precise information on what we cover today, please go to our website, which is ChinaWatchRadio.com. And Jonty has taken the time to put all of this information on our website so that you can find out exactly what all of that is about. Welcome, Jonty. How are you today?
Oh, great, Billy. It's good to be here with you. So what's going on with the Shanghai lockdown?
Oh, man. It's supposedly lightening up. Now, according to officials in that region of China, another 2 months of misery and lockdowns may be coming to an end. Shanghai is finally, according to officials, starting to lift the COVID restrictions for a second time. You remember this was announced before and began before the most recent round of problems appeared around the rest of the world, and China locked Shanghai back down. So authorities in the Chinese city have started dismantling fences around housing compounds. They've pulled the police tape down off of public squares and buildings, according to a report published by Reuters on Tuesday. Now, Monday night, here's the interesting part of this whole story. Monday night, residents were allowed out of their compounds for the first time in 2 months, according to the Reuters report. But the lockdowns also bring on a sense of wariness and anxiety among the residents. And Reuters says when people came out of the restrictions, they're still very wary of what's going on. Joseph Mack is a person who works in education in Shanghai, and he told Reuters that he feels pretty nervous. It's hard to believe that it might actually be happening, the lightening up of the restrictions. Not only has the recent bout of lockdowns triggered public protesting and anger in the city. Remember, the city has more than 25 million people. And it threw a sizable monkey wrench into the global supply chain when the lockdown was initiated, at a time when the world could really least afford a supply chain problem. So the Shanghai government has quite a problem now because it's the day everybody dreamed for a long time, but everybody sacrificed around the world, really. And so, they're taking it with a grain of salt, I guess is the best way to put it. We, of course, here in KSCO have one of our crew members has a relative living in China who has been locked down for this entire time. And the last that this person had heard from her relative was that they were still locked down. So I hope this is good news for them and for everybody else in Shanghai. But one professor at Fudan University School of Foreign Languages said the Shanghai government needs to make a public apology in order to obtain the understanding and support of the people of Shanghai to repair the damaged relationship between the government and the people who live there. I found that to be an interesting statement, also reported in Reuters.
Well, now, I mean, for the sake of our audience that's not familiar with our show, this lockdown's been going on for it's over 2 months now, isn't it?
Yes, I think it's like 2 months and 2 weeks. I think, if I'm not mistaken.
And it's when we think of the sort of lockdowns here, even the most draconian, insane lockdowns that we had here, you were still allowed to go out of your house. You were still allowed to go down to the store and get some food.
Well, I think that's the big difference too, Jonty, is the fact that when we were told to put on a mask and get a shot and stay away from other people and stand in line 6 feet apart and all that stuff, we were still allowed to move around. In Shanghai, they literally locked people in their apartments.
There's some rather disturbing footage of people not surviving apartment fires. The fire departments don't have an appropriate way to respond if the building's locked down. So that's been a problem. And as we've reported, there were dozens, if not hundreds, if not thousands of suicides.
Yes.
Just horrific videos of people jumping out of buildings, climbing out of buildings to try and go get food. Layers and layers of corruption with regard to the food delivery. There were many instances where folks were discovered to be selling the food they were supposed to be distributing to the houses. Of course, if you're not allowed to leave your house, then you're relying on others to deliver food to you.
There was certainly some corruption going on there. And the system that the Chinese government in Shanghai set up for the food delivery, lends itself to corruption. I mean, it's almost a given that because of nature of there's no check and balance at all, not even by the government, then the guys who have food to supposedly take to people who have either purchased it or needed it, it's a free-for-all out there.
Yeah. No, I mean, the break on corruption is don't piss off the boss, I guess.
Yeah, exactly.
But with regards to the end of the Shanghai lockdown, I think there's two more things that's worth mentioning. One is that there were, I don't even know if there were any COVID-related fatalities reported. Extremely few, if any.
Well, in a city of 25 million people, the amount of fatalities from the COVID lockdown might be higher than from the COVID itself.
Yeah, well, no doubt. I mean, that would be. It seems quite obvious that would be the case. I'm just going to check here really quick, and let's just have a look at China's total reported coronavirus deaths. They're saying 5,226.
5,000 out of 26 million.
No, that's out of the entire nation. So, and from the very beginning.
It's got to be higher than that.
So, I mean, do you believe that?
No,
right?
Of course not. Of course not.
New daily cases. I can only get May 26 here. They're reporting like 130 cases.
In Shanghai?
No, just period.
Oh, okay.
And it looks like actually between April 20th and May 30th, there were about 800 deaths reported nationwide.
Wow.
I don't know if that's just Shanghai. So, I mean, whatever you think of the effectiveness of the lockdown strategy, the cost benefit analysis on that becomes pretty lopsided.
We talk about the lockdown, right? And we talk about the actual physical lockdown of people, right? But what we all forget about China is they're also locking down information. So that we have no real, I mean, the fact that Reuters got enough information together to even figure out that the lockdown might be loosening up is amazing to me, because the Chinese information lockdown is maybe their from my perspective their worst governmental thing they do, but from their own perspective they may be the most successful at that of anything else they do.
Well, the success is really important. When you look at the model of governance instituted by Mao during the Great Leap Forward, for instance, you were required to produce enough grain and send enough grain to the whatever it is, the centralized distribution system. And if you failed to produce enough grain, you were accused of being a counter-revolutionary or something along those lines, and often paid the ultimate price. So under that circumstance, people aren't willing to look as though they're failing in any way. And
Right.
actually, I saw a headline today. Unfortunately, I didn't get to really dig into it, of suggesting that the local officials are having a really tough time releasing the lockdown on Shanghai, because any one of them is really afraid that if cases start rising, they'll be blamed for it.
Sure, absolutely, and that's actually a valid fear on their part, because guess what? That's exactly what's going to happen if the cases jump up.
It's a classic example of how a totalitarian system can lead to very poor governance.
And remember the "don't shoot the messenger" thing from way back in the Greeks? Well, guess what? If you're the guy who says let's unlock, you're essentially the messenger.
Right. Or you're definitely sticking your neck out. That's for sure.
Now, I want to touch on something you just pointed out. You went back to Mao and you talked about the food shortage, under Mao. Well, as I understand it, and one of the things you're going to cover in just a moment here is the fact that China is trying to, apparently anyway, if you believe some of the rhetoric, they're trying to starve the rest of the world. At least that's
a little bit of a clickbaity headline, but I like these two guys quite a lot. So there's if you go to ChinaWatchRadio.com, you can sort of follow along with everything that we talk about here, because we're discussing various articles coming in through different media channels. So there are these two guys that became rather popular with their YouTube channel, Serpent ZA and Lawai86. Those two guys who lived in China for about a decade, and they would go on these long road trips on their motorcycles and film the whole thing. And then they would just talk about their different experiences. Well, now recently they've been doing some really efficacious and quality journalistic work, taking some of their old footage of these drives through China, and then they just sit and discuss things that are happening right now and relating it to their experiences. So they posted a video with the title "China is Trying to Starve the World," and that's a topic that we've been sort of interested in, food security in general. Globally, we're all concerned about that right now, but particularly with regards to what's happening in China, I think we have to keep our eye on that ball. So I listened to this video of theirs, and they say a bunch of really interesting things in here. There's lots of little interesting facts and statistics. So China has a problem with good farmland being converted into some kind of housing or whatever it is.
Cement. It's cement. Converted into cement.
So one of the exactly, Billy. So one of the things they mentioned in this video is that between 2011 and 2013, just those 2 years, China used 6.6 gigatons of concrete. And then to give you a perspective on how much that is, that's the same amount that the United States used from 1901 to 2000.
Wow.
So China used in 2 years the amount of cement the United States used in 100 years. During all of the U.S.'s preeminent economic boom years.
Well, when you think about what happened in those years here in the United States, we built freeways, overpasses, the Hoover Dam. I mean, we poured a lot of concrete in a lot of dams around the country. We built a lot of stuff out of concrete.
And the problem here is that the U.S. Granted, we have our economic distortions, all manner of them, but I don't believe anywhere near as severe as China. So much of that is these whole cities that are not occupied,
vacant
by people. And if you're doing this over your best farmland, you're really creating a problem. But now, one of the things that China has been doing in order to mitigate its... China has about a 20-30% deficit in food. They produce about 20% less food than they need. So they have to buy that from other countries.
And they have, well over 1 billion people.
Yeah.
So that's a lot of food they need to buy.
Yeah, they say it's 1.4. There's other folks who think it's lower, and I'm not too sure. I disagree. I think Gordon Chan has put the number lower. I think Kyle Bass has as well. There are a couple other folks who've suggested that it might be more like 1.2.
Well, it's still over 1 billion. That's a lot of people.
Officially 1.4, so it's more than the United States over 1 billion. At any rate, one of the strategies that China has adopted is to stockpile grains. That's something they've been doing in an extraordinary way over the last roughly decade or so, but it's sort of accelerated. So officially, China has 1.5 years of grain storage.
Now, you and I have talked about something along these lines here. They say they can store that grain for that long, but you and I both have talked about this on this program before.
Yeah.
I come from an agricultural background. I can tell you right now, you cannot store that much grain for that long without having some of it go horribly bad.
Right. Well, we've discussed this previously on the show. I think it's something that's very interesting to sort of keep an eye on, because on one hand you have the CCP-controlled central government that has a certain perspective on things and a decision-making process where imagine just being surrounded by sycophants all day. Everybody you ask a question to, they tell you what they think you want to hear, and they're trying to find out how are we doing with regards to food. And everybody's really worried about losing their head, right? So
yeah.
So officially, China has half of the world's grain storage, 1.5 years of grain, and the assertion that they're hinting at in this video is that with this current global food crisis, China might be in a position to approach countries, particularly in Africa, because Africa gets a lot of its grain, so does Turkey, so does Egypt, from Ukraine and Russia.
Right.
And they're having a very difficult time doing that. It'd be neat to go into the actual reasons why. At any rate, so China might be able to turn around and say to all these countries, hey, you guys need some grain, to hold you over, because we've got some trade deals we'd really love to make. With you. You guys have some natural resources, and you know about the Belt and Road thing, right? So we could all be friends. And now that you're starving and we have grain, you're in a tough spot where you're going to want to make some deals. So I find that assertion interesting. It's something that we need to watch. I can't tell you, yes, this is or isn't going to happen. But what I can do is just read to you a couple little excerpts from another article here. These are a few of the... there's been this problem of these grain facilities burning down.
Absolutely.
So here's some reasons why they might be burning down. I'm just going to read like a couple of these. They're kind of fun. The party secretary of a granary in Anshan City sold 363 tons of soybean oil without authorization in December 2019, emptying out the city's reserve. He falsely reported that the oil was still in the tanks and continued collecting subsidies for managing it. I'll read maybe one more. I could read a bunch of these. There's a long list here. In April of 2020, the manager of Panjin City Granary decided to transfer 1,000 tons of grain from city to provincial reserves without approval. This grain was subsequently double counted as both city and provincial reserves. I think you get the idea.
There's a pattern developing here.
Yeah, so you talk about this 1.5 years of grain storage. How much of that is actually still there is a very interesting question, and it's
now. I grew up in a California farming family. Okay, and it so happens that much of the area where I grew up grew grain and rice, for that matter, but grain, a lot of grain. So I can tell you that every once in a while, if grain is stored too long in a silo, it does set itself on fire. It spontaneously combusts. It happens if there's too much moisture before it got stored, if it wasn't dried properly. There's a whole bunch of reasons why it sometimes happens.
Right.
But I would venture to say that if they're having a lot of spontaneous fires of grain silos in China because of what you just said, I would tend toward the A word, arson. Because I think their Chinese officials are going to try to cover their backsides while they set their non-existent silos on fire. You know, they're not full silos on fire.
Right. Well, China's got this kind of produced by the propaganda department. They've got this TV series called Zero Tolerance, which is just think if Miami Vice was made by the CCP or something like that, where they go around busting all of these officials for corruption, and the grain corruption has been one of the things that they've covered on that show. So they certainly know it's a problem. Everybody knows it's a problem.
I don't see how it'll continue to be a problem. I don't see how that's going to stop. Anyway, listen, we're right at the bottom of the hour. Let's take our mid-hour break, and we'll come back and change gears just a little bit. We're going to talk about the United Nations and propaganda and human rights, all in one little segment here. But we'll take a quick break, and we'll be right back on China Watch Radio.
Hi, I'm Dr. T. Win. I'm a podiatrist. I've got a new office, and I'm accepting new patients in Aptos. I don't bill insurance anymore. I used to, but not having to bill insurance allows me to spend more time with patients. And I value price transparency, so knowing their price up front allows patients to budget for their care, and they'll never get a surprise bill. If they're hesitant about not having their insurance used, I do offer a 15-minute phone consultation as well for free. Call us at 831-288-3400.
Hey, wine lovers! Armitage is a family-owned winery producing some of the best wines the Santa Cruz Mountains have to offer. At our tasting room and Aptos Village, you can enjoy a house flight, a glass, or a bottle and pair it up with a treat from our snack menu. Our heated patio is perfect for date nights and meeting up with friends. Mention this ad for 50% off a house flight. Open Wednesday through Sunday. See you soon.
Satisfy your hunger right now with the delicious ramen and sushi you'll find waiting for you at Kaito. Easy in and out location in the Capitola Mall food court. Special orders welcome. Fresh, delicious, and oh so good.
This is Koji. I'm looking forward to seeing you at my restaurant, Kaito.
Chef Ben here from the Back Nine Grill and Bar at the Pasatiempo exit, where we serve the very best house-ground burgers in Santa Cruz County and possibly the world. Come in Thursday for the Outlaw Burger and a pint for only $15. See you at the 9.
Ready to sell your home for the very best price? Looking to buy that perfect beach house? Call Aliona, your trusted Central Coast realtor, for expert advice and the best stress-free experience from start to finish. Aliona, 831-498-55. Call today to learn about my special $2,000 seller's reward. Aliona, your trusted realtor, 831-498-55. Or Google me, Aliona, ALYONA, Century 21. 831-498-55. Or Google me, Aliona, ALYONA, Century 21.
DRE number 02126414.
Responsible for managing an estate or liquidating a business? Call Clark's. Hello, I'm Patty Clark of Clark's Auction Company. Clark's offers a complete range of estate services, from selling one item to a house full, and we advertise locally, nationally, and internationally. Clark's is trusted by individuals, attorneys, and executors. Remember, we do all the work so you don't have to. Call today and see how Clark's can help you. 831-706-8776 or clarksauctions.com.
Hi, This is Hedva. Tune in every Thursday night at 9 for Hear It Now on KSCO. What is the it in Hear It Now? It's life. Life after an abortion. Listen to what my guests have to say. Call in. Be a part of the conversation. That's Hear It Now, Thursdays at 9 on KSCO, the radio heart of Santa Cruz.
Welcome back to China Watch Radio for this Thursday, the 2nd of June. I'm Bill Graff along with Jonty Collier, and we are having sort of a Chinese news day today on the program. We want to switch gears just a little bit after the break here and head to another topic. You remember Nikki Haley. She was the former United Nations ambassador representing the United States in the United Nations. And on Wednesday, yesterday, she called on the United Nations to fire its human rights chief after a controversial trip to Xinjiang. Haley dubbed this trip the Chinese propaganda tour. She said it looked the other way on genocide. Now, the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Michelle Bachelet, visited the region we're talking about, and the communist regime in Beijing has been persecuting minorities as part of a 6-day tour to China. This is what Bachelet went there to look at. I don't know how to describe this, Jonty. This is the United Nations.
Why don't we? Sorry, Bill, I didn't mean. Why don't we take a look at what the CGTN, China's state-sponsored news organization, is saying about the visit. I'll just read the title. UN human rights chiefs visit a chance to dispel misinformation about Xinjiang.
Yeah. See, I don't understand how they can even try to get away with this. You can't propaganda your way out of this story. You really can't. The evidence worldwide is overwhelming that the Chinese government is participating in what can only be described as genocide. Right. It's not just the Uyghurs. It's various other groups in China that are, suffering at the hands of the government. Activists and others, including Nikki Haley, had called on Bachelet to condemn what the United States and others have called the genocide of the Uyghur Muslims in that region. China has claimed it is engaged in anti-radicalization and counterterrorism, but activists and governments have pointed instead to evidence of mass detention, forced sterilizations, bans on religious and cultural practices, and torture.
Yeah, I mean, you can't put over 1 million people in a forced labor facility in today's world and then turn around and say that it's misinformation to go around saying that that's what's going on. I mean,
and you can't really hide it. I mean, look, if one person can get a camera anywhere close to a situation like that and smuggle the results out, you're sunk propaganda-wise.
Yeah, well, we've got that drone footage of a whole bunch of folks with shaved heads and bags on their heads and whatnot, all sitting with cross-legged, handcuffed, waiting to be led onto trains. There was just last week we were reporting on this whole cache of it's called the Xinjiang Police Files.
Right.
You can go to xinjiangpolicefiles.org or find those links on ChinaWatchRadio.com from last week's show. I mean, the amount of information out there confirming that this is happening, let alone our guest from 2 weeks ago. I think the cat's out of the bag here, guys.
Well, think about this. Even though the trip took place, it was apparently highly restricted by Beijing. Bachelet's remarks were heavy on praise for China, but measured in the criticism, which I find fascinating from somebody from the United Nations. But anyway, she touted the tremendous achievements in poverty alleviation. Well, sure, if you eliminate a whole bunch of people, they don't have to eat. Universal health care. Oh, yeah. I want to participate in China's universal health care program. That's the first place I want to go. Might not leave with all my organs. You know what I mean? As well as China's valued support of the United Nations in the 2030 multilateral agenda and the Sustainable Development Goals. Whatever the heck that means. Look.
Well, here, I think I just found the part where she had sort of addresses the Uyghur situation. And I quote, "I have raised questions and concerns about the application of counterterrorism and de-radicalization measures under broad application, particularly the impact on the rights of Uyghurs and other predominantly Muslim minorities." So that's what a lot of people are looking at, and they're saying, "Isn't that a little, light in terms of the what's going on here? Couldn't you use something a little with a little more teeth? As in, for God's sake, stop the genocide, for instance?"
On the regime's human rights abuses, she says she had raised questions and concerns about Xinjiang, but she also appeared to accept Chinese claims that all the policies were designed to tackle terrorism and radicalization. I just, give me a break.
I think if you're tackling over 1 million radicals, then at some point you have to realize that just in terms of the math, I mean, a radical by definition is a minority, is the extreme minority.
Yeah.
So if you've got some people say 3 million. Okay, so somewhere between 1 and 3 million people in a forced labor re-education facilities. Those are no longer radicals. They might be radicals now, after what they've been through, but that's not going and finding the small group of folks who are plotting to, whatever it is, bomb the train station platform or something. That's rounding up the entire bleeping population.
Yeah, exactly. Well, also, look, you can sort of say that Michelle Bachelet. Couched her comments, but make no mistake, Nikki Haley criticized it as only Nikki Haley could. She said, quote, "The United Nations sold its soul to China by continuing to let it buy off its agency heads." She said that one to Fox News Digital, and I'm sure they didn't misquote her. You can say all you want about Nikki Haley's and maybe her political aspirations, but she's calling it like it is when she sees this, I'll tell you that.
Well, remember the UK's got a pretty hard line as well. What is it? Their Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office is saying, it is clear that the Chinese authorities did not provide the full unfettered access to Xinjiang for the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights that we and our international partners have long called for. China's failure to grant such access only serves to highlight their determination to hide the truth.
Yeah.
So they're not pulling any punches either.
Well, it's interesting. The Biden administration kicked out a statement from Secretary of State Anthony Blinken. He said, while we continue to raise our concerns about China's human rights abuses directly with Beijing and support others who do so, we are concerned the conditions Beijing authorities imposed on the visit did not enable a complete and independent assessment of the human rights environment in the PRC, including the local region, where genocide and crimes against humanity are ongoing. Now, those are words from the current Secretary of State. Anyway.
Yeah, true to Blinken's form. I just don't know who's buying China's line, and why would...
Look, I think Vladimir Putin's buying their line.
Oh no! I mean, I tend to think he's a little more savvy than that. I think he buys the sovereignty line. That's where he comes in. But I don't think he's naive to the things that China's doing.
Oh, you think he's hip to what's going on? Do you?
Yeah, I would guess so. I would imagine. I mean, if you and I can figure it out, then the top.
Well, if I can figure it out, then it's obvious because I'm less than astute with some things. But if you hit somebody on the head long enough, their head starts to hurt. Yeah,
well, I mean, if you're looking at folks who were advised by the top think tanks and security organizations in the world, I'm pretty sure they know what's going on. Yeah. And the UN should be close enough to that sort of apparatus to not be allowing this kind of pandering. But then again, I guess China was just given a seat on, was it the,
I think,
the World Health Organization.
Yeah, and I think given is the correct term.
Zero objections.
Yeah, they were handed the seat. Yeah. Anyway, it's clear that the Chinese authorities did not provide full, unfettered access to the region for the High Commissioner on Human Rights, and apparently this is not going unnoticed around the world. There are governments all around the world who are seeing how this is playing out, and how the United Nations, it appears to some people, is being used as a propaganda tool. So
right. Well, I mean that's the real tragedy there, because it doesn't. I don't think any sane leader is going to. What it allows is for people who want to enter into deals with China, but their population would otherwise be not okay with that because of what's happening in Xinjiang. It provides cover. The UN provides cover, so now those folks can come out and they say, well, the UN just went and researched it, and they say, well, things aren't so bad. So, maybe we can make this this trade deal with China after all. So that's really the tragedy there. It's instead of getting their feet held to the fire, it's yet another instance where they get a pass, at least from.
Yeah, there's no consequence for their bad behavior.
Pass.
Yeah,
I think it's a really dubious form of pass, because it's so transparent. It's so fallacious. But I mean, there are folks who will capitalize on that. I'm sure.
Right. Well, let's talk about a story that might dovetail this a little bit. What do you think's going to happen to global trade when you take some of this stuff into account? Tell me about hyper-globalization.
Yeah, well, one of the neat things that we do is we have a variety of ways of finding interesting articles out there on the web, and before we do one of these shows, we have a discussion where we sort of decide, who's going to cover what, and I really was interested in this article about.
Well, me too, actually.
The title is After Hyperglobalization. And it was only when I thought I was about halfway through, and I realized I was only about 1/5 of the way through, that I kind of wondered if maybe I shouldn't have given it to someone else, But no, I joke. It really, this is a fascinating article, and a lot of things that are near and dear to my heart. Let me just read what I believe was the introductory paragraph, and I think you'll all get an idea of the flavor here. Again, go to ChinaWatchRadio.com. You'll see this under the Know Before the Show section, the list of all the articles that we're discussing today. And I strongly recommend to anybody who is really interested in what's going on in the world, take a look at this article. Okay, here's the introductory paragraph. Hyperglobalization is dead, killed by the rise of China, the supply chain catastrophe, the COVID pandemic, Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and the belated recognition that ultra-free trade was mainly designed to serve financial elites. At this point in time, I stand up and applaud, because, as I say, I feel like this article goes and just goes through a whole awful lot of what the heck's going on. I'm honestly looking at the clock, Billy, here, and I'm thinking 15 minutes. I might have to talk fast. Let me just go through another excerpt here. Since 2000, the global trade regime has also tolerated an extreme double standard for China. The Clinton administration believed that allowing China into the World Trade Organization with no enforceable quid pro quos would nudge China in the direction of political democracy and a less statist economy, as well as reducing the bilateral trade deficit. The opposite has occurred on all fronts. Amen. But the opening to China has been extremely lucrative to U.S. corporations and banks, which were the prime promoters of the deal. In the politics of trade, China now benefits by having politically powerful U.S. financiers and customers as a kind of Trojan horse that weakens any deviation from the status quo. There is no such Trojan horse in Leninist China.
That's scary. That's a scary statement right there, the last one, because it basically what it says is the situation that is currently taking place has no stops.
Well, yes, but it does. The article later develops some more things that have happened. Now it goes into a little bit of detail about Lighthizer. What was his role? He was part of the Trump administration. I can't remember the exact. It's like head of trade or something like that. Let me just look it up really quickly here. United States Trade Representative.
Yes.
Okay. So, but he was sort of given the job of what are we going to do with regards to China?
We got to fix this.
And what he did was something really interesting. Is he set it up so that I really don't know that much about the World Trade Organization rules, but the U.S. started blocking appointments to the WTO's appellate body. That's like their court. So if anybody recalls the WTO meetings in Seattle in
how could we forget?
1999?
Yeah, how could we forget?
The criticisms of the WTO were that they were creating this intergovernmental body that was going to have legal power. They were going to be able to legally enforce their rulings, but they weren't democratically elected. It was really a bunch of corporations deciding who they wanted to make decisions on our behalf.
Well, John T., if you remember at that same meeting, that same WTO meeting in Seattle in 1999 or whenever it was, they also set up what they referred to as the free speech zone outside when they had all the protesters, they made them all stand behind a cyclone fence and say, this is your free speech zone. And that's where I politely said at the time, and have been saying ever since, wrong. The United States is a free speech zone, the entire country, and you can say just about anything you want unless you're in a crowded theater that's on fire.
Right.
Well, that's about the only time you can't say anything you want.
The free speech zones and various other aspects of what was sort of a major national crackdown. A crackdown on the demonstration movement, which was at the time, I heard it referred to as the global justice movement, which is a little bit different than the social justice movement. Please do see that those are two different things. The global justice movement's concern was that various corporations, multinationals, were creating ways of making decisions on behalf of sovereign nations.
Right.
And then also conducting a variety of exploitive trade practices. And the WTO, well, what happened in 2000, China was admitted to the WTO. So regardless, the history lesson, this is the WTO we're talking about here. So with Lighthizer blocking appointments to the WTO's appellate body, they did not have a quorum by which to enforce a ruling. So that he basically removed the teeth from the WTO. It's funny how you don't hear about these things in the mainstream media, and that was also partly why the U.S. was allowed to impose a 25% tariff on Chinese goods during Trump's administration. The WTO didn't have a quorum by which to go after the U.S. and say that's you can't have that. That's an anti-free trade practice right there. So the WTO couldn't stop the U.S. from doing that.
You brought up something that while you were finishing your sentence there, my brain just went off in another direction for just a minute. You mentioned the fact that you were amazed that it wasn't really carried or followed in the mainstream press. And I thought to myself, as you were saying that, it's because of the way we train our American and mainstream press. They don't get the financial training they need to cover the subject properly. They're not. Some of these people are talking heads. I don't think some of them even know how financing works.
Right. I've seen some really interesting exposés recently on how the mainstream press in the United States used to be of the same class as the sort of blue-collar workers. They were paid a similar wage. They came from a sort of middle-class background, and now it's almost exclusively folks who are aspiring elites, essentially. and have a very different sense of what of what's real and what's not and what matters. But we do have a whole new wave of journalism happening in a way that it never has before.
True.
So that's an area that I still have hope, and that's certainly an area that you and I participate in. So so let's go back and have a little bit more of a look at this article. It discusses how China was subsidizing their steel industry, and then dumping steel in the United States to drive our steel industry out of business. And the WTO was essentially covering for them, because the WTO's rules are that you have to buy from the lowest priced provider. You can't block out some country's product because of labor concerns, environmental concerns, because of predatory practices. You can't block them out because they're destroying you can't protect your own country's industrial base, because that's not fair trade, right? Or free trade. Sorry, that's not free trade. So it now creates some opportunities. So to an extent, because of the tariffs that we've recently brought in and Biden thus far has left, also the U.S. Steel has been able to sort of have a minor beginning of a recovery. Also, U.S. textiles. The U.S. provides a lot of the raw materials to Central America, where, go figure, look, Central America has better labor laws than China. So if you're having your apparel and whatnot manufactured in Central America, it's probably being done so under more just and humane conditions than it would be
in China,
Xinjiang province, certainly, right? So that's the effect that some of the effect that those tariffs have had in a very sort of positive way. But there's also industries where China dominates the entire supply chain. For instance, the solar industry. Again, if you have a state government that is backstopping your industry, and I don't mean the sort of too big to fail BS that we've seen here. What I mean is that they're fixing prices for inputs. Prices just across the board in order to
they control everything. They control every aspect of that particular industry.
Right. The good old-fashioned word for it was mercantilism, which was the go-to economic model of, the British Empire, for instance, and the way that people in India weren't allowed to sew their own clothes, right? Because they had to buy them from British factories. So just a little reminder: mercantilism isn't new, but it is it has a very strong potential to be a predatory practice. So U.S. solar manufacturing has been really sort of devastated by the cheap Chinese panels. And then you've got, folks like John Kerry saying, look, global warming is the bigger threat here, guys. So we just got to make good with China and buy their cheaper solar panels. It's an opportunity. But another perspective would be like, how would we reinvigorate our domestic solar panel industry? We'd really have to create the entire supply chain, and to do that, it's going to take more than a paltry little tariff. We're going to have some kind of, probably a government initiated program in order to sort of build that whole industry out here domestically. Which, hey,
you'd almost have to force the fact that in order to have solar panels in the United States, they have to be made here. You'd almost have to pass a law, because right now it's so far along the line the other way that that's the only way you could really fight it.
Well, think how many solar electric company organizations and environmental organizations are going to bat essentially for Chinese-produced solar panels, because they don't want any sort of disruption.
Yeah, they don't want to go out of business.
Industry. understandably, that's in their self-interest.
And yet, the focus right now in this country, all you got to do is look at the automobile industry. Everybody's trying to go electric. At least looks like the focus. But without solar help and a whole lot of other help, we're not going to be able to charge these cars. I mean,
right?
No
doubt. Yeah, and then some. Now, there is a tariff on Chinese solar exports, which Obama actually instituted, and it's still on the books. And there's also the Uyghur Forced Labor Protection Act,
right?
Which a lot of the solar manufacturing in China is happening in Xinjiang once again. So, we have somebody who is. I think probably I'm really interested to learn more about U.S. Trade Representative Catherine Tai. I think she is kind of our ace in the hole in the Biden administration with regards to those of us who think we need to significantly revise our trade relations and then some with the Chinese Communist Party. On the opposite side is John Kerry, who's saying, no, we need to absolutely bend over backwards and just make things work, and wants to go back to sort of Clinton's policy of what's it called, engagement. I'm just looking at how close we are to the end of the hour here.
We're getting
what
there.
Else we can discuss.
We're getting there. I think I want to remind folks that they need to find out more information about this by going to John T's second home. He spends a lot of time with ChinaWatchRadio.com putting articles in there. I want you to please go there during our upcoming break, which is happening in just a minute. And when we come back from the break for the second hour, we'll be entertaining your phone calls, and we'll also be bringing up one more subject, a couple of more subjects, but I want to talk about the Pacific region, and something interesting has happened in that region in the last week or so. We thought China was moving in and establishing themselves and going to cause a big problem. Well, there's apparently some folks that are in that region that may not really want all that to go down. So we'll be talking about that in our second hour as well. John T. Collier and I, we're holding down the China Watch Radio fort today, and we ask you to hang on. We've got one more hour. We're going to break for some national news and information, some traffic and weather and stuff, but we'll be back right here on KSCO Santa Cruz.
Right now, that is about a 10 or 12 minute delay also. Your Central Coast forecast for the rest of this afternoon, mostly sunny skies, looking for a high today of 78. Other area highs to expect this afternoon: 84 in Ben Lomond, 72 in Watsonville, 65 in Monterey, 82 in San Jose, 85 Gilroy, 73 Salinas, and 87 tops out in King City. Right now, outside the KSCO studios, it is currently 77 degrees. KSCO News Talk time now, 3:06. That means it is time for the second hour of China Watch Radio.
China Watch Radio is brought to you in part by Sushi Market Sprouts on 7th in Santa Cruz and Kaito in the Capitol Mall Food Court. Treat yourself to the finest Japanese cuisine you'll find anywhere with fresh sushi to go and delicious ramen dinners. Sushi Market Sprouts and Kaito. Yum! Hour number 2 of today's China Watch Radio program is now underway. I'm Bill Graff, along with John T. Collier. Michael Olson and Amy Howe could not be with us today. And so we are doing what we'd like to call sort of a news version of our program today. We have been talking about a couple of different topics, all relating to China. We are going to take your calls in this hour. We already have one caller on the line, and if you'd like to give us a call, 479-1080 is the number. I do want to, before we get to calls, cover a couple of more topics. I want to move to the Western Pacific, the South Pacific area, because of the fact that a couple of shows ago, we brought up the idea that China was trying to move into the South Pacific region by opening talks up with the Solomon Islands, and in fact signed an agreement with the Solomon Islands for some support of that island nation when it comes to policing and some other things. Well, it turns out that the United States, Australia, New Zealand, and a whole bunch of smaller countries in the region are really kind of concerned about this whole topic. And it turns out that 10 Pacific Island nations have rebuffed China's push for wide-ranging regional security pact. That took place on May 30th, this past Monday, amid worries that the Chinese proposal was designed to pull them into Beijing's political orbit. And I don't think they're actually wrong in that assessment. Talks in Fiji began between the Chinese foreign minister and leaders from the small island nations, but failed to reach an agreement in a high-profile diplomatic setback for Beijing. China is apparently offering to radically ramp up its activities in the South Pacific, directly challenging the influence of the United States and its allies, including New Zealand and Australia, in the strategically vital region. And just to, in full disclosure here, I'm very concerned about this region because, as many of you know by listening to me on the radio, I spent a good part of my life in the South Pacific and lived in some of the places that are actually mentioned in this article. For instance, in a recent letter to fellow leaders, David Panuelo, who is the president of the Federated States of Micronesia, warned the offer from China was disingenuous and would ensure Chinese influence in government and economic control of key industries in the region. There was one particularly interesting part of this that caught my eye, and here it is. Papua New Guinea, Samoa, and the Federated States of Micronesia were said to be among those concerned about the proposals. But here's the one that really piqued my interest. Taiwan has formally been recognized by the country of Palau. And Palau was not invited to the meeting with China because they recognized Taiwan. But let me just tell you something I know about Palau. Palau has a rather strong agreement with the United States. Palau gets a lot of money from the United States, millions every year, in support of its harbor and its runway. Because if we lose another region that supports the military, Palau is the backup landing site and ship site for the American Navy. A lot of people don't know that. They were not invited. Palau was not invited to talk with China because they have an agreement with the United States and they have formally recognized Taiwan. Anyway, this is very interesting to me that these 10 little nations, Fiji, Tahiti, American Samoa, a bunch of these little places, they're little nations, you know, in size and in population, but they're all very important to the United States, Australia, New Zealand. They're just very important because they're in the middle of this region. And they have all decided to back away from China's marriage proposal.
Well, now, do you think that they are just using a negotiating strategy to try and get China to sweeten the deal?
No, I don't think. I think they're genuinely afraid to align themselves with China because they've been aligned with the United States for so long, and Australia, and New Zealand, and the United Kingdom. You know, when you talk about Australia, Australia is a separate country, right? They're their own nation. But when you talk about Australia, in the background, standing in the background, is the Queen of England.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, but that's the case. She may not be running things anymore, but guess what? They're sort of, it's like Canada.
AUKUS and the Five Eyes are both two very strong security agreements.
Yes.
So I don't think there's little doubt that that New Zealand, Australia, Canada, UK are all very closely allied, and then some with the United States as well. The statement from David Panalo, president of the Federation States of Micronesia, when he says that the Chinese offer is disingenuous and would ensure Chinese influence in government and economic control of key industries, that doesn't sound like a very light statement. It sounds like he's putting his foot down there pretty hard.
Well, and also you have to consider the history of the Federated States of Micronesia. These are places. Marshall Islands, Truk, Ponape. All of these, and Palau and Yap were included in that until they became separate nations. They chose to go off on their own. But in the old days, they were all part of Micronesia. And the thing about Micronesia is they have been overlorded by several countries over the last 120 years. Spain, Germany, Japan. They've all basically taken those countries from one another in war.
Well, don't leave out in terms of Southeast Asia. Don't leave out the British, the French, the Dutch, the United States.
Absolutely, no. And the United States. Look, when I was going to high school in Palau, it was under the Federated States of Micronesia, and it was under the trust territory of the Pacific, completely run by the United States government. And since then, a lot has changed in the last 2, 3, 4 decades. But you have to understand why David Banuelo would say this. I think he and the other island nations out there are tired of being overlorded by other countries.
Right. Although the other thing that happens in this scenario, which used to be part of the Cold War, system, is that when you have two major powers and they're both trying to get some kind of favorable agreement with a minor power, it puts the minor power in a negotiating position, whereas it could certainly be argued that in terms of the development goals of these various nations over the past, 70 years, they've been just sort of largely ignored. What's the risk? What's the cost of ignoring what they're asking for?
Absolutely. You make a very good point, but I will say this, in this instance, say, of Palau has a very strong agreement with the United States. They're benefiting very much from the United States agreement, and Taiwan is benefiting from being formally recognized by another nation. And make no mistake about it, the Federated States of Micronesia, places like Fiji, places like Tahiti, places even like the Solomon Islands. These nations have had a huge benefit of being protected by the United States of America and Australia and New Zealand. Nobody would dare go into that region and attack Fiji, for instance, or try to take it over. The United States Navy would show up in about 14 seconds.
Right.
So I think China may have bit off a little more than they can chew with this one. I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah, interesting. The dynamics there are, I think, much more important than people realize. I kind of wonder, did somebody go to Palau and somebody from the U.S. State Department and say, "Psst, hey, Palau, recognize Taiwan.
That's
Don't worry, we got your back. Recognize Taiwan."
I wish I could quote the exact figure. I can't remember the exact figure, but I'm in the ballpark when I say that the United States helped Palau expand its runway so that you could land anything that flies there. It's that big a runway. It's beautiful. It's a beautiful runway. They also Palau has a natural harbor that's deep enough for any ship, any vessel. And it's the backup for the United States Navy in case something happens, elsewhere and they need a place to, park some hardware. It's there.
Right.
But here's the thing. The amount of money that goes to Palau every year, I can't remember the exact figure, but it's something like $400 or $500 million. It's just a monumental amount of money. And it's because we have a complete agreement with them. They're their own country. Wow. They're their own separate nation. They're not part of the Federated States of Micronesia. Palau's its own place. It's like, Fiji. But they have a huge agreement with the United States of America. And it's an agreement that if the United States, if some guy from the State Department said, "Hey, recognize Taiwan," I'm sure they probably took under quick advisement and did it.
Right. Interesting. I'm just trying to find out the population of Palau.
Palau has I think Palau's population, if I'm not mistaken, is about 30,000 people. It's not that big.
Yeah.
It's a tiny little place. But it's beautiful and it's strategic.
And they use the United States dollar.
Oh yeah. Yes.
They're almost, I guess they're not big enough to be a state, are they?
No, and they're not, and they don't want to be a territory or a commonwealth or anything like that.
Right.
They are a separate nation, but boy, their economy is bolstered big time by the United States of America.
Well, how do you think they feel about China's new aircraft carrier?
I don't think they could get the aircraft carrier into when I say any ship, I'm not talking about aircraft carriers. A standard aircraft carrier that we have in the United States takes up a lot of room.
Right.
And the channel that goes through into the Palau Harbor is not that big. Palau is a bunch of little rock islands. It's like a reef that guards it from tropical storms for the most part. And it's very hard to describe, but there are shipping channels in and out. But I think the reason we want it is for things like submarines. If we had to park a submarine somewhere for a while or had to land a large aircraft, the airport in Palau will handle a C-5A without any problem.
Wow. Okay. So China did just launch a new aircraft carrier. It's called a Type 003. Now, their existing aircraft carrier it was called the Liaoning or something. I think it was called. It was actually a little teeny pocket carrier that was in the possession of Ukraine, and Ukraine being as corrupt as it is, it was turned over to some billionaire who turned it into a floating casino, and it was then actually purchased by a private Chinese businessman and then handed over to the People's Liberation Army Navy. And
turned back into an aircraft carrier?
Turned back into an aircraft carrier. So that thing was a bit of a joke. But now the Chinese are actually getting serious. They've just launched an aircraft carrier. Now, when I say just launched, this in terms of aircraft carrier development, you first launch the thing, and then you begin sea trials. And that can go on for years. So the thing is still very much in development. But they just launched a 320-meter aircraft carrier with a displacement of 85,000 tons.
That's 1,000 feet long.
Now, that's 320 meters. Now, a Gerald Ford class U.S. carrier has a length of 333 meters and displacement of 100,000 tons. So it's would still be baby sister to one of the U.S.'s aircraft carriers. It's probably more comparable to England's Queen Elizabeth class.
Right.
I think England has 2 Queen Elizabeth class aircraft carriers. They displace 65,000 tons. They carry about 40 F-35s, give or take. They've been in service for a little while now.
Now, does the new Chinese aircraft carrier, if I read right, is equipped with electromagnetic catapults?
What they're saying is that the intention is to equip it with electromagnetic.
So they don't have them yet.
So for those in the audience who aren't total Navy dorks like me and Billy, one of the big challenges on an aircraft carrier, and one of the things that determines how tough the thing is, essentially, is how quickly it can launch its aircraft
and retrieve them, launch and land.
So if you have, if let's say you have, like the Gerald Ford class, they have about 75 aircraft on them. It would be probably half of those would be F-35s. The rest would be like F-15s.
And I believe each
F-15 Growlers and Hornets and stuff like that.
But each of those aircraft carriers has 4 catapults, or I believe.
3. The U.S. Sorry, you're right. 4. Sorry,
no,
the
it's
US
4 catapults. Yeah, I'm pretty sure about that.
3 lifts, 4 catapults.
Right.
So the U.S. carriers, let's say, have 75 aircraft. But let's talk about combat time. So if they're taking off or they're landing or getting serviced, they are not viable weapons during that time. They're a liability during that time. So you want to keep the things in the air as much as possible. The other thing you want to be able to do is launch them in a really big hurry. So you find the enemy's opposing forces, you find their aircraft carrier or whatever, or they find you. You want to get your planes in the air as quickly as you can. And a traditional steam catapult on an aircraft carrier's deck just takes a heck of a lot longer to reload at all.
Well, they have to run those boilers, and it takes a lot of energy to launch an F-35 off the deck. They're launching it in 1,000 feet.
Right, or less than, because they're landing planes on part of the darn deck. So the advantage of an electromagnetic catapult, it's really a very recent invention. I think the U.S. has only sort of just gotten to where we're competent with the things in the last couple years.
The USS Ronald Reagan is the only aircraft carrier currently equipped with electromagnetic catapult, and it took them a long time to get it fixed.
Right. There's even a period of time when they're saying, I don't know if it's worth it, guys. Let's just forget about this idea.
Well, as I understand it, they tried building it and testing it on the aircraft carrier itself, and they figured out we need to do this on land first. And so they built the electromagnetic land and receive thing on the ground first, I think in Las Vegas or somewhere out in the desert somewhere. And they finally figured out how to make it work. And then they transferred the technology that worked back to the ship.
Right. And now the thing that, so, it could and should take China a really long time to perfect.
Unless they've got some spy that stole all the technology they did everything else.
I think as we all know, and if you don't know, I'm going to tell you, there were several terabytes of data about the F-35 program that were stolen. And China is now developing an aircraft called I think they call it the J-31. It's got another designation, but I don't remember it. Which is, boy, it sure kind of looks like the F-35, if you know what I mean.
Oh, for sure. I mean, you can't steal that kind of technology and make it look different. It's got, the aerodynamics and everything else are the same. Hey, listen, we do have a phone call. You want to take a phone call in the middle of this?
Cool. Don't forget the break, though. But yeah, sure.
Let's talk to Nick in Florida. Let's see if I punch the right button here. Nick, you're on China Watch Radio. Thanks for waiting.
Hey, how you guys doing?
Good.
Hey, I was going to talk about 4 different things, but what you guys were just talking about with Palau and everything, and all of the people who are supposed to be our allies, I just want to say, New Zealand, they're part of the Belt and Road Initiative, and they were pretty neutral about the whole Australia and Papua New Guinea getting a base and stuff too. But I want to talk about Elon Musk with the Starlink. You guys hear about that with his satellites? The PLA was saying they can take them all down or whatever. And then Elon was like, oh, there's 2,000 of them and they're too small. But, I mean, he has that plant, that Tesla showroom in Xinjiang,
Oh, yeah, he's got a big Tesla plant in outside of Shanghai, if I'm not mistaken.
I definitely know he has one in Xinjiang. He just put the one in there recently after, people have been talking about that genocide for a long time. I don't know if I can say that on air, but...
You can say that on the air. That's absolutely par for the course of what our discussion's about. To know the inside shtick on Elon's relationship with China would be absolutely fascinating. Because there's a lot going on there. As you point out, he's got a massive Tesla facility, and he has a market that he wants to retain access to.
And he's going to need the resources that China has to build all those batteries for all those cars.
Yep, exactly. Lithium is mined in Xinjiang, apparently. And
as for
cheap labor.
As for shooting down
the satellite Starlinks,
satellites, there would be a cost-benefit analysis there in terms of the cost of the missile versus the value of the satellite. Elon's Starlink satellites provide internet access, and that's that could. There's certainly a Great Wall of China scenario where that could be a real threat to China, to the CCP. That is,
information-wise, yeah.
Chinese people would love to have access to free internet that has no restrictions, but in terms of shooting down a satellite, I'm pretty sure in any kind of military engagement, that's going to be the enemy's GPS and information gathering satellites that you'd be trying to take out long before you'd start looking at Elon Musk's 2000 Starlink widgets.
Yeah.
I also want to bring up another thing too, though. A few months back, China had a new satellite they put out with a grappling arm and laser weapons to blind satellites, so they don't have to necessarily shoot them down. And a laser, you can just sweep it around. You know what I mean?
But Nick, isn't that to repair satellites, in quotes?
Right.
That was the story.
Militarized.
Yeah. That was the story, was it had a grappling arm and some other hardware on it that China said initially they would be used to repair orbiting satellites. If you believe that, I've got some farmland in lower Florida that you might want to buy.
Right, exactly. Another thing too, I don't know if you guys talked about. I know you guys really don't talk too much about the politics of China too much because it's all soap opera stuff. But Li Keqiang, you guys heard about? He was talking about how the lockdowns were hurting the economy, and then they had to edit all the newspapers to make it seem like he didn't say that. They had to walk it back.
Yeah, that's the Chinese propaganda machine works very well, and we often actually you're somewhat misguided about that. We talk a lot about politics on this program in China.
I mean, you guys don't really talk too much about like someone taking Xi's place or him getting a third term. You guys try to avoid that.
We've done about 3 shows dedicated precisely to the topic of whether Xi's going to remain in power.
Oh, that's right. You guys did. Okay.
Yeah.
We definitely cover that, and I really appreciate your call as well.
Yeah,
I'm going to look up the situation with Li Keqiang. That's interesting.
Thank you for calling. We're about 2 minutes over our break time, so we're going to have to go to a break. But we do appreciate you hanging in there and talking to us today.
Yeah, thank you guys for taking my call.
All right, take care. Let's take our break. Jonty will do a little research, and we'll be right back on China Watch Radio. Satisfy your hunger right now with the delicious ramen and sushi you'll find waiting for you at Kaito. Easy in and out location in the Capitola Mall food court. Special orders welcome. Fresh, delicious, and oh so good.
This is Koji. I'm looking forward to seeing you at my restaurant, Kaito.
Your sewer problem is no problem when you call EcoFlow Plumbing.
Hi, I'm Melissa. EcoFlow Plumbing serves homes and businesses throughout the Monterey Bay Area. When you call EcoFlow Plumbing, we will fix that sewer problem in the shortest amount of time for the least amount of money. That means your sewer problem really is not a problem when you call EcoFlow Plumbing. Mention KSCO and get a $300 discount.
Call 831-818-6331 or ecoflowplumbing.com.
Historically high gas prices, rising crime, unsecure borders, and this insane inflation. Are you done yet with the Biden progressive policies? Jimmy Panetta supports them all. Let's break up the Panetta-Pelosi team. Hello, I'm Dalila, and I'm running for Congress to help stop these progressive policies that are hurting all of us and our families. When you vote for me, you're voting for a fighter in Congress. So on June 7th, vote Dalila, D-A-L-I-L-A, for Congress.com.
I'm Dalila Epperson, and I approve this message.
Do you have internet problems at your home or office? Etheric Networks Internet has been providing internet for over 12 years to the Central Coast. You do have an alternative. Etheric Networks is one of only a handful of internet service providers that signed the industry letter to the FCC supporting net neutrality and is dedicated to maintaining a secure, free, and open internet experience. Join the Etheric Network and experience our superior service. Our contracts are friendly and simple to understand, as opposed to the complexity you will find with the cable and phone companies. We offer predictable monthly pricing. We have local technical support that's available 7/24. Importantly, Etheric offers the same speed on upload as download. We offer a symmetric service. Traditional weakness of both phone and cable companies will often offer much slower uploads and downloads. Call 650-399-4200 or visit etheric.net online. That's ETHERIC.net. Don't forget to mention KSCO to receive your $239 discount on installation equipment. Happy surfing.
If you think things couldn't get any worse, think again. We're all now in completely uncharted territory, all of us, from the entire COVID-19 scenario to covert climate engineering operations in our skies to unfolding ecological collapse around the world. Converging catastrophes are closing in from countless directions. What cards will the controllers play next? Tune into the commercial-free, non-political Global Alert News Hour, Saturday mornings at 8 a.m. on KSCO 1080 AM. This is Dane Wigington from geoengineeringwatch.org.
Hi, this is Boring Jeff of the driver's seat. And we're racing into KSCO on Fridays from 2 to 4 to cover cars, including racing cars, sports cars, collector cars, and anything else with a radio in it. We suggest that you tune in here at KSCO 1080 AM, and you can listen to the show also on KSCO.com. Driver's seat, Fridays from 2 to 4. Join us for the fun.
We're in our last 25 minutes of our program for this week. You're listening to China Watch Radio. I'm Bill Graff, along with Jonty Collier. Amy Howe and Michael Olson could not be with us today, so we're sort of holding down the fort and doing sort of a news program on China, some of the latest stories that have come out that we don't really have time to talk about with on a regular basis. We are discussing in today's program. Where do you want to go from here, Jonty? You want to talk about you want to continue with the aircraft carrier, or you want to keep going?
Well, I just want to thank Nick for his call. I'm looking at an article here in Al Jazeera where I'll just read this a little bit here. Chinese Premier Li Keqiang, sorry, I really need to learn how to pronounce Chinese words, don't I? Last week urged a reported 100,000 local government officials to immediately take action to stabilize the situation in China amid upset and anger over the fallout from its commitment to zero COVID. Now, that actually reminds me of an interesting video that we added to our list of articles this week with the title Tianjin, China's third big city in outbreak. Students are under lockdown since January, supply chain crisis. Now, the title doesn't do justice to what I saw in that video, which was really quite incredible.
I watched that video before we started the show today, and I was just amazed. Man alive.
You're seeing a whole bunch of Chinese students demonstrating, protesting.
We haven't seen that since Tiananmen Square.
Yeah, I mean, it's occasionally little things will leak out, but it gets heavily censored. So that was real interesting. There were also these kind of videos of folks claiming that there's all sorts of corruption going on with the COVID testing. There was this lady who's in part of the lockdown strategy, or part of the zero COVID strategy, is that they'll actually say everyone has to get tested every day in an entire city. And if you don't get tested, you can't go into a store, you can't go into your job.
Well, how many people live in Tianjin? It's not nearly as big as Shanghai, is it?
I don't know, but I can figure it out.
Well, I'll tell you what, if you tell everybody in Shanghai, a city of 26 million people, every day they have to get tested, that's a lot of tests. Does China really have that many tests to hand out and distribute every day? I don't really think so.
Yeah, I remember when Gates and friends were investing in the testing equipment. It looks like almost 14 million people in Tianjin.
So that's 14 million tests every day to every resident.
Yeah. So this lady's showing up at these testing facilities, makeshift facilities, and they've got tests all over the table that have already been opened. And she's saying, what the hell is this?
It's contamination. That's what it is.
Yeah, I'm not going to take this test. I don't know what the hell's on this test. This table's filthy. And she gets in an argument with the guys, and she ends up doing a little citizen journalism / activism, and she goes down to the local the local group that are sort of organizing the testing, and she starts chewing these folks out, essentially, and filming the whole thing. And they basically told her to get lost, or they were going to get physical with her. But that was a really interesting video. All kinds of little tidbits of things actually going on inside of China. I really think this zero COVID situation is
we go
nearing the boiling point.
Sure, we go back to the scene of the drone flying through Shanghai at the height of the COVID lockdown, and the message, if you translate it from the Chinese into English, is basically saying, please stifle your wish to be free.
Yeah.
I mean,
the soul's desire for freedom.
Yeah.
There's something that I added to our list of articles last night, but you and I never had a chance to talk about this. There's been, and I really think it's worth getting to. There was a leak, apparently, of a high-level CCP military brass meeting. The meeting is to, and it's a little tough to tell what's going on here. This was reported by, the Times of India. It was reported by Jennifer Zhang. She's a fantastic human rights activist, China-born.
IBTimes.com. Yeah. Yes, that's the International Business Times, but it was originally reported in the Times of India. It's a meeting of top Chinese generals. And I read about this. The leaked audio clip about the invasion of Taiwan, supposedly.
So they're apparently discussing the normal to war transition. And they're kind of going back and forth and sharing different ideas about things that they should really do to make the transition from normal to a normal footing to a war footing. Things like we need to defend certain critical infrastructure. We need to get some 10,000, 15,000 specialists in various areas and draft them into the military.
Come on, we need to take all the oligarchs and make sure they've got a big cement place to hide.
Right, I'm sure that might be an element as well. Actually, one of the generals said we need to absolutely make sure that we do our best to defend the civilian population and prevent loss of life.
Yeah, the oligarchs.
Which, we often say things on the show. There's lots of perspectives expressed that the Chinese government, the CCP, doesn't care about the number of civilian casualties. That might be the case in a lot of situations. That certainly appears to be the case historically. But I found it interesting to see one of these top brass guys saying we definitely want to try and limit any kind of civilian casualties. It's sort of, a counterpoint. Not everyone necessarily thinks, the way that Mao did. But the thing is, are they, and I really need to dig through this to figure this out, are they actually planning a transition to a war transition? Or are they having like a brainstorming session about what we would do if this happened?
I think it's probably a little of both. I really do. Look, they've been hinting at going after Taiwan for decades. They've been hinting at it for quite a while. And I think the only thing stopping them, the reason they didn't do it before was because, they were worried about what would happen when all the other nations that want to back Taiwan would actually step up to the plate. I don't think China was aware of, they were unsure whether Taiwan was going to get backed or not, but they didn't want to take the chance.
Yeah, I mean, some of it just doesn't add up. 140,000 soldiers and 953 ships. Look, 953 ships is very impressive.
Well, unless the ships are all 33 feet long or something.
That's what they are. They're including their kind of merchant marine in their military, because they would just take eminent domain over a whole bunch of. China has a kind of militarized fleet of quote unquote fishing vessels that go and mess with the Philippines and Vietnam and various countries to try and bully them around and use their territorial waters to exploit in various ways and to try to lay claim to shoals and things of that nature. 953 ships, but 140,000 soldiers. Taiwan has a standing army of 250,000, and then they have reserves in the order of something like 2 million. So I don't see those numbers don't add up. There would have to be that might be an initial invasion force. I think the D-Day landings were somewhere around 130,000 initially.
Yeah.
So maybe that's what they're talking about there. It's still, I don't know. I'm going to have to pick through it and see what's really going on.
And here's the other thing that I wonder about. We heard for years about how strong the Soviet army was, right? Mm-hmm. And we've now realized they're nothing special. Mm-hmm. If the Ukrainian, militia can at least fight them, and have some success. The Russian Navy isn't, the Russian army isn't all it's cracked up to be. I wonder how good as soldiers are the Chinese army. In reality.
In defense of not really defensive, but just to have a little perspective on the situation in Ukraine. And I'm hoping at some point that I get a chance to write up a piece that I can share with my co-hosts and the audience as well, because I've looked into the situation there a fair bit, and I don't see what most other people see. I see a sort of very contrary perspective.
So you're saying the Soviet military is better than we think?
They're absolutely creaming the Ukrainians. They had a few setbacks in the beginning and very quickly changed strategies, and their loss ratio is
down now.
Well, the Ukrainians are falling apart.
Look, I'm surprised they lasted as long as they did, aren't you?
Yeah, but it's very advantageous to a certain class in the United States if we all think the Ukrainians are winning, and we got to keep sending money and weapons over there.
Oh, for sure. I understand that.
From the start, the responsible thing was to sit down and say, let's just solve this, guys, without any military, escalation.
Yeah, what I was quoting really was the fact that the reports I read were that in the opening part of that conflict, the Russian army lost a whole bunch of generals, which in the United States way the United States fights, we I don't think we've lost a general in combat in quite some time.
Yeah, and then there were a bunch of folks showing photos of those same generals that had supposedly been killed, waving and hanging out and saying, "What? I'm fine." It's difficult to tell what's going on through the fog of war. But I think you make a valid point, though, with regards to the
Chinese
3.5 million person Soviet Union military that was the justification for all sorts of counteraction on the part of the United States, and the massive buildup of missiles when it turned out later that the satellite or U-2 images that we were getting from Siberia, it was actually of them laying some pipeline or something, and the overzealous folks were. So I mean, there might be aspects of that, and it's always very difficult and dangerous to get that sort of thing wrong.
Exactly. You don't want to underestimate the other side's power, but I'm just saying,
Right.
I don't know, because of the way China cracks down on its media, we don't really know what 140,000 Chinese soldiers really means.
Yeah, I mean, the standing army of China is supposed to be the largest in the world.
But if they, if the majority of them don't have weapons and bullets, how tough are they?
There's an issue of that exact same sort of corruption where some general goes out to do some training exercise, and the exercise is to fire 100,000 rounds through their howitzers or whatnot, and they fire 10,000 rounds, and something happens to the other 90,000 rounds.
We'll call it good.
Yeah. Now, the U.S. has issues with that as well. My friend in the Navy used to talk about how they would just take an aircraft carrier out into the ocean, push a crate off of it, and then turn around and sail back in, and because the crate expired, right? It had an expiration date on the whole crate. And there were things inside the crate that would expire, and then there were things like hammers. So they'd turn around, sail back into port, and buy another crate.
Yeah. No, and also, I lived in Hawaii for a long time, and the Navy would go out and periodically. This was way back in the day. They don't do this anymore, I don't think. But then they would send Navy ships out and have target practice on Ko'olave. Shoot a couple of rounds off and then go back to port.
Yeah. Well, I think something that's important to realize about Taiwan is that Ukraine had 8 years of military buildup and experience to prepare to do some kind of thing with Russia. I don't want to go into the details. As I say, my perspective is very different than most people's. Taiwan has spent about 70 years preparing for a military engagement with China.
Right.
Taiwan had a nuclear program, I think, in the 80s that was through some U.S. diplomacy they were convinced to abandon, but they have multiple nuclear reactors. They could, if they had a few months of warning, they could bootstrap a nuke. It's a different situation with Taiwan. That's not a one-to-one relationship.
No. Hey, listen, we do have a call. Dick's been waiting for a little while. You want to take Dick's call on from Santa Cruz? Let's do that now. Dick, you're on China Watch Radio.
Hey, guys. You were talking briefly there about what I brought up, that meeting of those minutes that were a whistleblower let go of out of some one province in China. And Mike Adams and J.R. Nyquist went over them. So you might want to listen to that, Jonty. And Jenny Zinn, too. The information that she gets out of China. But anyway, I like what you're saying about, of course, I like what you're saying about your opinions about Ukraine. And maybe the propaganda might be slanted so that we can, basically, give them more money and give them more weapons. But there is a turning to that war, I think, right now. The Europeans are starting to say, hey, and settle, or let's talk about, some line in the sand with Russia in Ukrainian soil. So I'm a little hopeful about that, even though now they're sending them missiles, I guess, missile packs that will go 250 miles, and the Ukrainians could shoot them into Russia, which would escalate the war. I don't like. Hopefully, a lot of Americans don't like. I know. I don't think Jonty likes that, but I would say I had a couple of questions for you guys. Your reactions, real quick. Biden had a presser in Japan. He expressed military intervention in Taiwan. The U.S. would.
He said He said he would. We would. When asked if we would defend Taiwan, he said yes.
Okay, so that means boots on the ground. What's that mean?
Well, we don't know what it means. The only thing he said was one word. The one-word answer was yes.
Yeah,
I think you can just insert any statement. Biden said blank.
Yeah,
and then ask the question, what does it mean?
We have such a good policy, don't we? The other thing I wanted to bring up that was in the news, since you guys have a news show going on right now, is, and I don't know if I missed this from you guys, but there's a lot of unemployment in China, like tens of millions of 20-year-olds that cannot get a job, and the graduating class is coming out, the 2022 class now, and most of their jobs are STEM jobs. These guys, they go into chemistry and the hard sciences and math and biology and computer science, and there's no jobs. So I think the pressure cooker is going in China big time.
Yeah.
And that those comments that you were making about the whistleblower 56-minute meeting that escaped, that was just one regional area where they were talking about ramping up or going to more of a war footing.
Yeah, it's one Guangdong province, but I think that's also the one closest to Taiwan, which is already heavily militarized.
Right. Well, in any case, the world's getting more dangerous. It's a good idea that you guys are talking in terms of solution and understanding all this. I really appreciate your show.
Well, thanks for calling and giving us your input. We appreciate it. Take care of yourself.
Bye.
Bye.
Yeah, thanks, Dick. Over the course of the last year, just think how the dialogue has changed with regards to the question of whether Xi would be able to remain in power.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And November is fast approaching. That's when China will make the decision. Mm-hmm. November is when I put my hands up in air quotes when the election takes place, because
right,
it's not our idea of an election, actually, folks. But when they make the decision on who will be the next, we call him president, but Nansu and Amy both say chairman is a better term.
Yeah, chairman.
Chairman is a much better term. So we'll find out if he stays in power or if someone else takes the reins. And we don't know who that. There aren't that many other names being bandied about, but we'll follow that situation. We promise. We have been, making a close watch on that whole scene. We haven't taken our eyes off the ball on that one, believe me. But
right. Well, Dick makes an interesting observation with regards to unemployment in in China. It looks like ages 16 to 24, which that might not be the most employed segment of the population, anyways. But they're talking about 18.2% in April, up from 16% the previous month.
Boy, that's a pretty bad percentage.
Yeah.
I mean, that's below 20% employment. That sucks. That's awful.
Well, unemployment. I mean,
well, that's what I mean. That's a huge. Wow. And look, in this country, in most countries, that age group is when you're starting out in life. You're maybe starting a family, maybe trying to get a good job to start your life out, that sort of thing. And that does not bode well with that high an unemployment rate.
Yeah, well, earlier we were talking about the that article after hyperglobalization, and really in terms of what I think we're seeing, I think this article nails it. Is that we were all kind of suckered into this global experiment in free trade. Free trade that, as the article started out, was mainly designed to serve financial elites. And with that system in duress, if not in free fall collapse, we have both this kind of critical, all these critical risks arising, instabilities, supply chain interruptions, but we also have an extraordinary opportunity because we actually have a chance to turn around and say, well, hold on now. We've tried this experiment here, this lovely experiment of doing what's good for Wall Street, and it's very good for the Chinese Communist Party. Why don't we try the experiment that's good for the middle class in the United States and see what comes of that? That's an experiment I would really like to see our political class engaged with in a meaningful way, and I'd like to see their feet held to the fire in that regard.
Well, so would a whole big segment of the American population.
Right. Well, why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you want a better life for your children than you had for yourself? Well, if there's any one reason why we haven't had that I can see, it sure as hell, Johnny Depp's relationship didn't have anything to do with it. I tell you what.
It's true.
What are you spending your time on in your day focused on?
Yeah.
I tell you what, all of the things that people are up in arms about really don't make that big of a difference. If you want to deal with the mental health crisis in the United States, empower people. If people, when they're disempowered, they go nuts. Violence is not something you do when you're empowered. Violence is something you do when you have lost power.
And when you've lost hope, too.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's a hell of an opportunity here.
Well said, my friend. Well said. Well, that just about ends our program for today. I want to remind folks, if you're interested in some of the things we've talked about on today's program, go to the website, ChinaWatchRadio.com. Jonty's put a whole lot of work into it. Look at some of the articles we've been talking about. Bring yourself up to speed and call us next week. We want your input. Jonty, thank you so much for all your help today. Hope Amy and Michael are with us next week. Until then, we hope you're with us next week. This is AM 1080 KSCO Santa Cruz, Salinas, Monterey. Flight 1080 is coming up. See you next week, Jonty.
Take care.